In today's video, I'm going to cover the S&P 500, the Dow Jones, Nasdaq, specifically the ETFs SPY and QQQ for S&P 500 and Nasdaq. I'm going to go over the economic calendar, 10-year treasury, crude oil, my thoughts on the market, how I think it's going to move, and basically give the price actions in terms of support and resistance and the movement overall with the averages, moving averages. So hopefully you guys like the video. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. If you do, consider dropping a like. It does help the channel. So thank you so much for that. Appreciate it. And if you want to be notified when I do upload my next video, because I do upload these for the most part daily in terms of the market overall day by day, consider following to be notified when I do upload my next video. First, I'm going to start off with the economic calendar. So on May 6th, we have at 12:50 p.m., we have Richmond Fed President Tom Barkin speak, and at 1 p.m. New York Fed President Williams speaks. So not much for this week specifically, FYI. Reason why I think the markets will be going up. But then next week we have CPI and PPI. So that is next week, Tuesday and Wednesday. But again, until that happens, I'll keep you guys posted day by day. But for the time being, we have the U.S. 10-year Treasury at 4.49%, which is dropping since at a high of 4.7060 recently. And that was not too long ago. Let me see if it gives a date. That was on April 25th of 2024. So that is a good news. When it does drop, hypothetically, more money tends to go to the market. Not a guarantee, but it tends to. Again, that is the U.S. 10-year Treasury. And then crude oil prices are dropping to $78.11 per barrel. So that is also good news in terms of energy cost. Now, if we look at the overall market, I'm going to start off with QQQ first, which is the Nasdaq ETF. And for the 5-year chart, it looks like everything's going to start bouncing up to the upside for the time being. And the reason why, again, I think because economic news, pretty much nothing's happening unless something happens, let's say in the Middle East in terms of tensions overseas. But for the time being, I don't see anything dragging down besides maybe inflation numbers next week. So within the week time frame, I think everything's going to go up, and that's being pointed through the technicals as well from what I see. And like always, I'm not a professional, so please do your own due diligence and research before buying and selling. This is all technically all just my opinion. So since 2010, for the new viewers, we've been stuck between upward trend resistance line and upward trend support line between this channel. We did break out in 2020 to 2022, and then pretty much around, when was it? February timeframe, got knocked down, somewhat touched again, I think potentially, almost, yeah, and then got knocked back down. And then it looks like we found a place to bounce off of and hopefully go to the upside, hopefully. But for the 5-year chart, it is in the bearish movement. It does look like it might curve to the bullish movement, but we'll see. And then in the 1-year chart, it has crossed over to a bullish. We attempted to cross over to a bullish at one point, failed, got into the bearish territory again, and then now crossed over to a bullish, and it seems like it's going to possibly happen. We could get knocked down by the moving average here at pretty much ballpark of $436. Right now we're at $435.48. But at the same time, we could get. There's a couple things I got to show specifically for, I think, the SPY, or when I go over it in terms of the QQQ. But there's a level that technically we might be just passing slightly and then just still getting knocked down. So that's why, in a way, if inflation numbers were bad next week, I could see us coming down, and it could hypothetically, this whole week would be like a false breakout, massive false breakout throughout the week. I just don't see that happening personally, but we'll see. Again, this is all just my opinion. So then in terms of 6-month, we are in the bullish movement, heading to more upside potentially, and 3-month as well, still in bullish movement. It looks like it's going to try to arch down, and I think the 1-month also showing arch down. So hypothetically, it's showing the terms of like the short term, it's technically slightly going down, which kind of would make sense more to the narrative that, yeah, we're hitting some limits and we should be coming down at one point. And the limits would be more likely to be met if we slow down the upside. And then by the end of the week, then we hit the limits, as opposed to hitting the limits really soon and then having a false breakout and then heading down, if that makes sense. But we'll see. We'll just go over it for the most part. But yeah, for the 1-month bearish movement, so technically in terms of short term, hypothetically shows that downside should be coming up soon. Like not soon, but like pretty much in the time being we're in right now. And the long term, hypothetically upside, but not extreme long term, right? But yeah, so now in terms of the 3-month, we're going to go over it. We have an upward trend support level right here, acted as resistance as well. So resistance we've seen it back here, support, multiple touch points, right? And then here, resistance as well. And the question is, are we going to get hit by resistance as well on this upside trend that we've hit before, and plus a downward trend? So now the downward trend, we had 3 touch points, but then a false breakout right about here. And we did bounce off a little bit if you zoom in more. So now we're at $435.48. If we were to head up to the upside to meet up the first one, we're looking at $440 and some cents. The next point would be about $441 and some cents. And then when I measured earlier, so let's say pretty much up to 442, because usually the markets don't even hit those points exact. Well, they kind of hit them exactly, but there's like fluctuations based off how you draw the lines and so on and so forth. So $442. But if we do pass it and have just pretty much a week that just keeps going up and doesn't get hit because there's no real news to impact it from what I could see, and then we're heading to the 400, there was about the 444 to $448. Oh no, sorry about that. There's a resistance at the 44 and 45, but that's not crazy because I think personally it's just going to pass anyway. The resistance, mainly the channel in terms of a lot of points. If you see horizontally here, there's a bunch of times we like spike up pretty much all around the same ballpark and get knocked down, right? That's between $446 to $448, maybe a little bit extra, some change on top, $448 and some change. But pretty much that is the range ultimately getting knocked down. So if I were to draw it out a little bit, let's say we spike up, obviously it won't happen like that, but just FYI, and then we probably stagnate a little bit here and then break out or something like that. Then once we get into the like 446, 448, it's just potentially just going to get knocked out, head down, and then I don't know, depends on what would happen. Maybe bounce off this upward trend as support and head back up, or just break down and bounce off this downward trend resistance line that acts as resistance and bounce it off support. But that's going to take some time. It's not going to all happen in one day. It'd be quite crazy just because the volatility index, it is on the low side right now. It's at 13.48. So I don't expect that much volatility, especially this week, since there's nothing that I could foresee. Potentially earnings, obviously, because we're still in an earnings season, basically. So earnings could basically spike it up for bigger hitters, but I don't know. We'll see. We'll have to wait and see for the news potentially here and there. Now, in terms of, that's for the upside. What I expect to most likely happen, because everything's hypothetically pointing to the upside besides the short term somewhat, we could stagnate a little bit between the 432 to the, what was the number last time I gave? Because it's still in play. I think it's 438, 439. So 432 to 439 just stagnate within this phase, which kind of coincides with this resistance that I shared earlier with the 439 and 440. So pretty much stay within that ballpark, 432, maybe even hit 430 again, because we do have major resistance / major support at 430. And then if we do head up to the downside, and then the limits I already gave earlier, by the way, in terms of the 46 to 48, but those will be the range plays. So either consolidate sideways and then spike up to those levels that I mentioned earlier and have the breakout, or to the downside if you're trying to protect for the downside. Again, ultimately the 430 there. Okay, so you could be in within the channel too, because last time, remember I said between the 432 to 433 and some change, there's like a small channel pocket there, and then it would hit the 430. The question is, would it bounce on the 430? Hard to tell, debatable, but I could see it bounce on the 430, but multiple times it just gets stuck in that 427 to 429 channel, and then from there it's the 424 to 425, and then the 420 to 421. The 420 to 421, personally, just because I don't see any bad news, I think that would be for sure a bounce to the upside. So to draw it out, basically, let's say we just went down to 420 or something like that, 420 and some change, we would just, in my opinion, spike up. And then ultimately meet this downward trend resistance line or this resistance line. The reason I say that is if you go horizontally here, you can see right about here, 420 and some change. We bounced off of it, 420, almost 421, 420 kind of stuff, 420 as well. It's just pretty much around the 420 to 421 ballpark. Multiple times bounced off it. So given that, that's what I'm thinking. And then if it goes downside to extreme, yeah, there is some support around the 417, 418, but ultimately 416, and then the $413, $414 price point would be a for sure showstopper in my opinion. But that is if you think the market's going to head down. I personally don't think they're going to head down that much. I think we're more pointing to the upside, and given that the short term showing bearish movement as opposed to bullish movement just for the short term, I think it's more like sideways consolidation for the most part. Obviously for your Nasdaq, it is more volatile than S&P 500, so the consolidation will be a little bit more extreme in terms of levels. Now, if we look at SPY, which is the S&P 500 ETF, Then 5-year chart shows us that we're in the bearish movement, not really showing a curvature to the upside as like the QQQ did. And then also to show the channel too, it's a little bit more within a channel range, I would say. So since 2010, you can see upward trend resistance line didn't break through, maybe some small false breakout during the January 2022 timeframe, give or take. Then upward trend support level, and then these were the major crashes, potentially upward trend support level as well, but there's only 2 touch points. Who knows when the third one will happen, if it will happen and abide by this upward trend support line, but we'll see. But there's that. Now, in terms of 1-year chart, MACD line movement, just like QQQ, we had a potential to go cross over to bullish movement, but we didn't. We got stuck into the bearish movement still, and then now we've crossed over to the bullish movement. Again, more of a reason why I think we're still going to the upside for the time being, right? Until some major news hits or something and it reverses, because that 5-year chart still shows that we're in the bearish movement, so it still could happen. 6-month chart, we're in the bullish movement, and then 3-month chart, I believe, same like QQQ, it's curving down. Yeah, so in the bullish movement and curving down, but there's some interesting stuff. We had a downward trend resistance line just like QQQ, had 3 touch points as well. Didn't have a false breakout for S&P 500 though, but we've broken through it now. So to me, that's more of a reason why we're probably heading up as again. Again, this is just my opinion. Please do your own due diligence and research before buying and selling. But this could be a false breakout. I just don't think, because of the news, that this is going to be a false breakout where we're going to get pulled back quite a bit. Like if we do get brought back down, I think we'll ultimately get to head back up, unless if it takes too long, where the CPI and PPI were like within that week. Let's say by the time it gets to Monday, right? So right now it's May 5th, 2024, right? On a Sunday. By tomorrow, we're fine. Throughout this week, we're fine. But if it takes by next Monday for us to get to high levels, then I don't think we're going to get past certain levels, because what's going to happen is, just because the anticipation of the inflation numbers, the markets tend to not do too much, and they end up dropping for the time being until those numbers come out the next morning. And the reason why for that is essentially the market wants the Fed to cut the interest rates, and they're anticipating 1 interest rate cut, but they want it to be solidified. The confidence kind of gets increased sometimes, but then it gets decreased based off some news and so on and so forth. But if ultimately it doesn't get cut, the market will probably react in a negative way, potentially. But I think everybody expects that the interest rate won't get cut until the Fed is satisfied with meeting their inflation number of 2%, right? Currently we're at 3 point something percent, and I can't remember exactly, maybe 3.5, 3.6, but I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that, but I know it's the 3% range. But at the same time, they want to get to 2%. So cutting rates right now, for me, it doesn't make sense hypothetically if you go off the logic of what the Fed is saying, right? Specifically how they're thinking they're going to target inflation, so on and so forth with the interest rate. But either way, I digress. So for that was a 3-month chart, I believe. Yeah, 3-month chart, still in bullish movement, but looks like it's going to cross over to the bearish movement. And then in terms of 1-month chart, we are in the bearish movement, and technically it's pointing to the downside, but it's not really dramatic that much. Now, if we go to 3-month, just to go full assessment, we have within these channels that we have already bounced off of, went up to the upside, downward trend resistance line broke through, and then the next levels we're looking at. So we've already hit the, what is called 511 and some change. And then I would say the next major level is pretty much $518 and some change. So $518.59 showing right now, but give or take within that $518 price point, maybe closer to the high price point. I think that's ultimately what we could be heading up to. But then the first level we have to break through is the 515. So 515, and then maybe if everything goes well, go to 518. But my bad, I should have been clear. The 515 is going to be quite difficult to pass the first get-go. So maybe 518 the following day. So probably by Tuesday, potentially. Again, if all is good and no bad news comes through. Okay, so 515, some change, maybe in the 514 range, and then 518. Now, if we were to head down, I think we would bounce off the 510, which was resistance back then. So 510 and some change. I think we could bounce off it as support. Right now we're at $511.29. And then 510 would be potentially support. If we do not bounce off 510 and support and head down to, like, for example, the $507, $508, $509 range that we were stuck in a bunch of times, then we might end up getting stuck underneath them again. Once again, if we break through yeah, in my opinion, if we break through $508 and get head to 507, let's just say 507 the low side, we're probably going to get stuck again on this downward trend resistance line, and the breakout was potentially a false breakout. And then if we start heading to that downside, like I said, with the 507, then we're looking back at that same level again at the 504, 505, then support at the 503 potentially. I think personally we would bounce off at the 503 right about here, this level. But if we don't, then we're heading down to obviously the levels. So the 500, and then every single time we hit the 500, for some reason we hit the 499 high range, $499 in, like, let's say 80 cents. And then we're just going to start trickling down to the 495, 494, 493 last time. I think the 493, and then ultimately, in my opinion, $493 for sure we bounce up to the upside. I just personally do not see those low levels happening personally, but that's the case in terms of the movement. But in my opinion, again, we're heading up to the upside. Can have some hard times passing $515 and some change, and then in my opinion, probably get knocked down to 518, depending on how fast we go there. If we go in there in one day, I think the high side would be 518 by tomorrow if we just spike up to 518. But that's just my opinion. Again, please do your own due diligence and research before buying and selling. And that's it. Or actually, wait, there's the Dow Jones too. The Dow Jones is interesting because it kind of does show the potential movements in the future, hypothetically, because it's more concentrated, but we'll see. So this is within channels. Short term, it shows just like QQQ within terms of the curvature as well, with the bearish movement right now, but still curvature to the upside. We didn't necessarily bounce off this upward trend support level like we've had in the past, but it got close. More of a reason why I think even though short term does show to the upside, and the long term it shows to the downside hypothetically in terms of bearish movement, I think we're still heading back down at one point. I just don't think it's the inflation numbers though, because the the PCE, I can't remember the acronym exactly. It was slightly increased, right? So because of that, I don't think the inflation number is going to be quite high potentially, but if they are, then I could see us coming back down and bouncing off this. But I don't see any reason right now for the time being to head down. In terms of, so the 1 year as well is not as well, but is in the bullish movement, just like QQQ and SPY. And then for the 6-month chart, bullish movement heading to the upside, and then 3-month chart, just like the rest of them, bullish but crossing down potentially. And then in 1-month chart, this one is bullish as opposed to the other ones, but potentially showing to the downside. So maybe, to be honest, maybe tomorrow it might head to the downside. I just don't think it's going to be extremes, but nobody knows for sure, I guess, potentially. But we'll see. In terms of the levels, though, if we head to the upside with this upward trend resistance line, like I showed earlier, maybe the 5-year chart will show better, right about here, we're ultimately hitting, I already calculated earlier, looked at it earlier, so we're at 38,675 points right now. We're heading to 40,000 clean. Not 40,000 clean, sorry about that. 40,045 points, give or take. So around there, that's the upside. And then to the downside, if we were to drop down dramatically, which I personally don't think it's going to happen, but let's just say, just in case, worst case scenario, let me see, so this is just ballpark, about 37,400 range, give or take. Maybe if I should zoom in closer, it is, so yeah, about 37,400 and some change in terms of points. That's to the downside, again, to bounce up potentially to the upside. But that, again, has to be assessed pretty much at least week by week, not month by month and all that stuff. Because if you do it month by month, there's so much things that affect the market that it's way too hard to assess it month by month fully. But yeah, that's basically it for today's video. Hope you guys enjoy it. Hope you guys like it. If you do, consider dropping a like. It does help the channel, so thank you so much for that. I do appreciate it. And if you want to be notified on my next video when it gets uploaded and so on and so forth, consider following so you'll be notified when I do upload my next video. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.